Scallywags, welcome to Under the Crossbones. My name is Nick Hoffman. I am your host, your happy flight attendant, and the captain of the ship for the next 3.5 to 4 hours. We have a great show for you today. Episode 208 has us talking to Wayne Curtis. He is the author of And a Bottle of Rum, a book that I would guess a number of you have either read or at least purchased, and it's sitting happily on your shelf near some rum. He also wrote a book on walking, and we'll get into all of that very, very soon. But let's talk first about this. Episode 208. Now, oftentimes on this show, we've talked about the number 208, and sometimes there is a cool connection to a number, and sometimes there isn't. Today, there isn't. I mean, you may have one, but you guys, you don't email me as much as I wish you had. So, but if you have a number coming up, 209, 210, 211, and you go, oh, I have got a great fact for that number, email us, reach out to us, hit us on Facebook. Just send me a note so that I can see what you have in mind, and maybe I will include it. And I will say this, if I get your note, I will mention you, and I will send you something from the booty box. I don't know what's in the booty box right now, but I'll check. And if that happens, you'll have to just make sure I have an address so I can mail it to you and get it to you. I will tell you this, though, since I don't have anything for the number 208, I will tell you this interesting bit of trivia. I was at Disneyland this past weekend, put in the miles you need to put in to walk the park. So I think on Friday, we did about 10 miles of walking. And on Saturday, we're there for half a day. And we did 5 miles. Now, I have a friend that walks 5 miles almost every day. So he gave me a hard time about this. But I felt pretty good until I got home. And then I felt pretty crippled. I felt like I had no way to walk around. I felt like a peg leg would do me better. But it was great. It was great. If you haven't been to either the Florida park or the Anaheim park lately since Rise of the Resistance has opened, I recommend it. That was a great time. I will tell you that my trip highlight was on the Jungle Cruise. Now, I'm not going to remember his name at this moment. Let me see if I can find it while I'm telling you this. But, you know, one of the things about the Jungle Cruise is, of course, the entire experience is dependent on the skipper and how well the skipper gives you those corny lines, the tone, the timing, what the jokes are, etc. And we happen to have a skipper on this past trip that was absolutely the best skipper I have ever experienced. His name was Carl, Skipper Carl. And you can ask for him by name, Skipper Carl. He's great. He's been doing it for a little while, and his timing, everything, it was perfect. It was perfect. I'll tell you what, to get on Rise of the Resistance, you have to enter a number, try to get a boarding pass, and it happens first thing that they all disappear by the first minute that you're in the park at 8 o'clock in the morning. If there had been a virtual queue for the Jungle Cruise, and I knew that if I got that virtual queue, I would get to go on with Skipper Carl again, I would do it. That guy was great. He was just terrific. So here's my trivia. It's connected to Disneyland, and since this is a pirate podcast, it's connected to pirates. Now, many of you know that Disney worked with a number of famous voice artists to create the voices on the rides. And one of the most famous is Paul Frees. Paul Frees on Pirates. Now, he may have done others, but I know he was the voice of the auctioneer, at least the original voice. I don't know if they've changed it since. I know he says different stuff. I'll bet you they changed the voice. Well, anyway, the original voice was Paul Frees. Paul Frees was also, for those of you that are old enough, the voice of the Pillsbury Doughboy. And I'll do you one better. If you ever saw the movie Some Like It Hot, not only was Paul Frees the actor that played the funeral director, Mozzarella, in the movie, very early in the movie, he's also overdubbing Tony Curtis's voice when Tony Curtis is doing the female voice throughout the film. So that's Paul Frees. Now, I don't know. I think it's a mix. What I've known was it was a mix of Tony Curtis's voice and Paul Frees' voice working together, but it might have been that it was just Paul Frees when he's doing the female voice. Anyway, that's your trivia. I do have another bit of information. There is a huge pirate gathering coming up. It is August 7th and 9th, 7th through 9th. It's in Germany, and I'm going to make sure that I put a flyer for that gathering both on the webpage, if that's where you visit us, and also on the Facebook page, because that's even easier for me. But it's a huge gathering. It's going to be a lot of family fun. There's going to be pirates from all over the world there, and that will be happening in August. So I would tell you the name of it, but it is in German. And although I am German, I would butcher this name, I'm sure of it. So I will just include links all over the place and try to plug as much as I can. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm hoping that you're enjoying the show. I'm hoping that I've been able to keep some of that energy up that Phil so famously brought to the show. I'm hoping that you're enjoying the guests that I'm bringing to you. And I think today's guest will be no different. Wayne Curtis is a freelance writer, has been so for a long, long time. But he also wrote a book that is near and dear to my heart called And a Bottle of Rum. He also wrote a book on a famous walk that happened from New York to San Francisco. And it might be called The Last Great Walk. I had that in front of me a moment, but I don't right this second. But we will get into it and we'll talk about it. So please enjoy this great talk that I have with Wayne Curtis. All right, Wayne Curtis, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Doing very well. Glad to be here.
Happy to have you. I have been a fan of your rum book for a while, a fan of rum for a little bit before that. So I'm very excited. I'm sure that folks that listen to this podcast, most of whom in one way or another connect themselves to the love of pirates, probably also connect themselves to the love of rum. So they are probably somewhat familiar with your work. So I'm excited. I think they're going to be happy to hear from you. Tell me how you came to freelance, because I think of all the stuff that I could start talking to you about, being a freelance writer is probably the thing that makes you the most authentic pirate we've had.
I think freelancing, it just suits my temperament, which is to not have to go to work at a regular time every day and not have to deal with bosses every day. It's pretty free booty, I guess, in pirate terms, if that's a term. I don't know, but it's
It works.
I just never found a job that I wanted more than to sit at home and write. So here I am.
Sure. I often joke with my wife. So a little backstory. I'm an adjunct professor, and right now all the classes I'm teaching are online. But a lot of the creative stuff I've done, I also do stand-up comedy, but a lot of the creative stuff I've done has put me at a computer at my house. So I often joke with my wife that when I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and she goes, "Is that what you're going to wear?" I'll say, "Well, you got to dress for the job you want to have."
Right.
And no pants is the job I want to have.
That's a good thing to have on your resume.
Yeah, although I found that when you go to places where they put in actual hours in an office, they are more likely to want to see you in pants.
Yeah, I know that's the case for me. I imagine it's the case for many people as well. Pants are good when you have to leave the house, but without having to leave the house, why bother?
Exactly. Now, speaking of pantsless situations, you've spent through your writing, you do a whole lot of traveling, yes?
I travel pretty regularly, but maybe once a month or so. Mostly for work. Most of my writing the last 5 or 10 years has been about spirits and cocktails. So if I'm leaving town or leaving the house, it's usually to go to a bar or a distillery somewhere, see what's happening. So yeah, like I said, about once a month.
And for And a Bottle of Rum, you spent a fair amount of time doing some research in the Caribbean, yes?
I did. I think it was 3 trips to Barbados, which was the main focus. Just because that the book is basically I make the case that Barbados is the source of all modern rum. Not necessarily it's where rum was invented. I think you could make a case that it was certainly in Asia. It was no doubt in South America and some of the Portuguese and Spanish colonies, but those were never evolved into become the rum industry that we know today. So I think that really started in Barbados. So ended up in Barbados quite a bit.
And were there other Caribbean islands that you ended up in as well?
I did. I spent some time in Trinidad, spent some time in Cuba, uh, then went to Jamaica and Puerto Rico briefly on those trips. So yeah, it was hopping around. And then also in the U.S. went to Hawaii to the distillery out there, and came to New Orleans a couple of times to talk to people down here. That was not so much that New Orleans is a rum center, but a lot of people who know about cocktail history migrate to New Orleans and wanted to talk to them. Also, probably the world's largest private collection of rum was down here, which I wanted to come down and see and sample.
That and I bet in reading about that in the book, that must have been like rum Disneyland.
Pretty much, pretty much. It's one thing to see a collection where everything's just on the wall and you can admire the labels and read the backs, but it's another to find a collector who's game to crack open a bottle and pour a glass and let you try stuff from might have been from the 1890s in Boston or the 1920s during Prohibition in Cuba or some of the later interesting, Jamaican expressions from the 1940s and 50s. It was basically a rum Disneyland, and it was all e-ticket rides.
Now, before writing about spirits extensively, would you have considered your palate relatively sophisticated, or
No, the opposite. I was basically a beer and wine drinker from college onward, and got into the rum book mostly because I was interested in American history. I'd been writing a lot for some magazines on history, like Preservation Magazine. So I was reading a lot about America's early days and kept coming across references to rum, and was a little puzzled by it. I wasn't sure why it kept cropping up, like in the slave trade and piracy and the American Revolution. And so I thought I should read a book on it to find out what it was about. And it turned out there really wasn't a good book on rum history at the time, so I decided I would write it. And that's when I was forced to start drinking rum and decided I like this. It came later.
I am learning more and more about rum through the enjoyment of uh, various bottles, and certainly I'm new when it comes to a lot of that. Partly because as an adjunct professor, I can't afford a lot of the bottles that I want to try. But I also have to assume that as you were talking to lots of folks who are connected deeply to rum, that both tasting it while someone there to help you understand what you're tasting helped a lot.
It always does. Yeah, I'm convinced that a good story will actually influence your perception of taste. Someone has a good story about something, it permanently changes the way you taste it. I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but it does. And all the distilleries get to taste stuff right off the still, taste stuff right out of the barrels. You get to learn about the differences between different strains of this and that, different yeast, and it's a real education. It becomes really good. I mean, just one example, I was convinced for quite a while that you couldn't really have terroir in spirits because it's an industrial process. You're stripping everything out of it, and a lot of the commodity stuff used for rum, molasses, is bought on the international commodities market, so there's really no sense of terroir that I think you can claim like you do with grapes and wine. But in visiting Martinique, I was at the Nissan distillery there, and the proprietor took me out back, and there were a dozen big steel tanks there, and I was asking what was up with the tanks, and he said that each of those were distillates from a different field on different parts of the island of Martinique, and that they tasted different. And it was his palate, it's how he combined them and made his rum from that. So we tasted some, and it was quite different from one to the other. That was really striking.
Wow, that's Yeah, well, it makes sense though that of course that the different parts of the island with different soils and different microclimates and whatnot would create slight variations in the beginning product. Yes.
Yep, that's exactly what was going on. But it was, because they weren't getting on a commodity market, they weren't getting it um, just through the usual channels. They were producing their own, and now we're seeing more of that happening in the U.S. as well with craft distillers, more frequently in whiskey because there's more corn grown in the U.S. and grain grown in the U.S. But here in Louisiana, there's some people starting to play around with locally grown sugar and starting to explore that aspect of it as well, which is good to see.
Yeah, it's funny how the how a cycle like that, originally you would have variations, not just with rum, but with, your dairy products. A local farmer who has those individual things happening at their farm, so their milk or dairy products taste a certain way. And that originally was because it's not like they're moving. That's where they are. But as foodie culture and other types of preferences have evolved, we now are requiring folks to go back to more source grown things because we want to be fancier. But it used to be that's just where they were.
Right. Yeah, it used that's the transportation was the problem is the problem that's been solved. So it used to be, in Scotland, the reason why Isla Scotch was so smoky and peaty is because they had peat to dry the malt with, and they had, you know, other products, wood and the like, elsewhere on the island they could dry it with. So it tasted different from place to place, and then it just sort of became cemented. Now everyone's, buying their, in Scotland, great vast majority of Scotch distillers are buying their smoked, their, peated barley from what, one or two made suppliers and just trucking it in because transportation has made that feasible. And that's true with rum, with bourbon, with just about everything. So, yeah, I think people are moving back. Uh, they're It's not just because they want it fancier. I think people are just a little more concerned about what they're putting in their mouths, what they're doing in their bodies. They want to know what's happening, where things came from. I know one of the preeminent rum manufacturers in the U.S., Privateer Rum, appropriate name for this podcast, out of Ipswich, Massachusetts, switched their molasses supplier within the last year or two, in order to know where it was coming from, because they were buying from the commodity market as well, and they'd start asking, where's this molasses coming from, because our customers want to know. And they were like, why are you even asking? We have no idea where this came from. The tanker ships come in and the tanker ships go out. But they did find a supplier, a fifth generation molasses importer in Canada, that could send them pictures of the actual sugar plantation where the sugar was cut and the factory where the molasses was extracted. So they had a chain and that was important to them because they felt it was important to their customers. So that's, that's starting to become a much bigger thing, and I think we'll see more of it across the spirit world. People wanting to know the origins.
Yeah, I was listening to a different podcast, How I Made This, I think is what it's called, and the folks that made, I'm going to think about it in a minute. It's a seltzer water. Then when they first started, they had used natural flavoring, and they switched from that because they discovered there's no way to figure out what natural flavoring actually is. And
Huh.
so they, like you said, they wanted to give their the folks that drink their product, they wanted to make sure they could tell them, yeah, well, this we know what this is.
Now that's definitely a change up.
Now, early on, I was reading a little bit of bio notes on you, and you had you had mentioned that you suffered from vocational, what was it?
Vocational attention deficit disorder. I
There you
can't.
go.
Yeah.
But the very earliest work you were putting in, you worked on the family farm, yeah?
No, I think you might be confusing me with another Wayne Curtis, who's a writer in Canada. Could that be?
What the heck? Do you know that guy? No, I'm just kidding.
I do. We because I get his emails and he gets my emails, and we switch them back and forth. I
That's
live
funny.
just in the summer. I live in Maine. And I'm only a couple hours from him, and I met him once. I met him once at a book fair, but other than that, no. But he's connected to a family farm. I am not.
I gotcha. What's great about that misunderstanding? I have a page associated with the comedy I do, and there is another comedian named Nick Hoff. So no man, just Nick Hoff.
Hmm.
And anytime he has a really successful show somewhere, my Facebook page adds a fair number of folks
Huh,
excited to be able to connect to me. And
that's
so,
handy.
yeah, well, except for I do send out a notice if I notice a surge of folks. I don't want them not to connect to the guy they had a good time with. So I'll
Right,
mention,
right.
hey, I'd love to have you around, but here's the page you're looking for.
Yeah,
Uh, which who knows? Maybe that makes them think, hey, this guy doesn't seem so bad either.
right.
Uh, but all right, well then, good thing I didn't do 20 minutes of prep on a farm background.
Nope, nope. That would have been interesting to me, but it also would have been alien. So
That's all right. You ended up moving to New Orleans in 2006. That is right, right?
that is correct. That is this Wayne Curtis did that. Yes.
Gotcha. And aside from now, you visited a few times in connection to the book. Did you just find, wow, this should be home? What about it?
Pretty much, I did feel that way pretty much instantly down here, and I think it's not an uncommon response for people visiting New Orleans, but everyone has their own reasons that something happened or they found that they were just attracted to the city. And for me, I've always been interested in history. That's sort of one of the things that drives me. And I'd lived in New England for 20 years and liked that a lot. And there's a lot of history up there, but it all had sort of expired and when it was reconstituted, it felt like it was a marketing thing more than not. People would say, "Come down to the wharf and listen to the the sailors singing their sea shanties," and it's like, okay, that's sort of fun, but it was dead for 150 years, and it's just been brought back. But when you come into New Orleans, I was sort of taken aback by the fact that the culture's still alive and there's still a direct connection with the history. You see, group of teenage kids on a street corner with brass instruments, and they're playing stuff that their grandparents would have recognized, except that maybe they've added a hip hop or a funk beat to it, changed it up a little bit. But it's still evolving and alive, and it's true. I think with the food, the architecture, the music. It's still there's a lot of it feels like a living history here. The I think really the only other place I felt that as strongly in North America was in Newfoundland, up in Canada, which also I think has a lot of direct connections to the past. So yeah, that appealed to me immediately about New Orleans, and having lived for 20 years in Maine, the idea of being able to bicycle year round was a real plus as well because it always made me sad to have to put up the bike in the winter and wait for the first day you could go out. So here it's every day. It's great.
Yeah, climate is huge. I've discovered. I grew up in Southern California. I did a few years in Florida, but I'd spent the last 10 or more years up in Northern California. And while it was still California, I built a deck on the back of the house and put out a lot of work to try to spend evenings out there. But in the evening in the town of Petaluma, the clouds roll in, the cold air moves in from the water, and you don't want to be out in the backyard.
No.
And moving back here, I just took pictures today of flowers in my front yard so I could send it to my mom who's in Kansas to brag a little that look, there's parts of spring peeking up here
Yeah.
because that's
Interesting.
where we're at.
Yeah. Where are you? Where exactly are you?
I'm in Ventura,
Okay.
and I grew up in Moore Park, just over the hill. But now that I'm even closer to the ocean, I think the weather varies even less from one
Yeah.
time of the year to the other. That's pretty great. Now, so Bottle of Rum was 2006, but I just discovered another book of yours, The Last Great Walk. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yep, that is one of my books, not the other Wayne Curtis's books. The that came out 5 years ago, and that is really it's a book about walking in general, but specifically it's about a walk that occurred in 1909. It was man named Edward Payson Weston walked from New York to San Francisco. He did it in 105 days, so he averaged about 38 miles a day on his walk, and he was 70 years old. He turned 70 years old the day that he left New York. And I'd come across reference to that years ago, and I was just sort of fascinated by it and started researching it, and found there was a whole lot of information about Edward Payson Weston. He's sort of a prodigy walker, and could walk like no one else. And I just got real interested in, again, the context of what it was occurring. And I sort of pitched the book as being, call it The Last Great Walk, because I make the case that it's really when humans have evolved for 5 million years to become really adroit and effective and efficient walkers. And I think in 1909, I sort of made the case that was the year we stopped, because that was the year that Ford went to the assembly line and General Motors was incorporated. A lot happened. That was first year of the running of the Indianapolis 500. And I just sort of felt like that was the year we pivoted and started shifting towards car culture and away from a walking culture. And I just want to examine how that has affected us. And I sort of looked at it both physically. I believe our bodies were evolved to walk somewhat like 6 to 8 miles a day, and we no longer do that. So how's that affected us? I think our minds evolved the same time as we learned to walk upright, or in conjunction with that, and how it affects our thinking, and also just how we've changed our landscape and to adapt to the automobile rather than the travel on foot. So there was a lot to dig into there. It was fun.
That's awesome. Now that wasn't his first walk, right? Because he had done a
Oh
number of
no,
walks.
no, he was famous as a youngster, and well, in his 20s. His first walk was he bet somebody that Abraham Lincoln would not win the election, and of course he lost. So he had to walk from Boston to Washington to go to the inauguration, and it turned out he was quite a walker and also a pretty good hustler. He sold advertising for his trip and had sponsors and passed out leaflets along the way. But no, and then he really was the father of pedestrianism, which people now, it sounds like some sort of quaint and archaic sport, but at the time it was massive. People would turn out for huge crowds of people come out just to watch walking competitions. People go around a track. There were 6-day races. There were distance races. People would wager on a walk between, say, Providence, Rhode Island, and Chicago, whether a person could do it in so many days. And then there were sub wagers within that about whether he could accomplish a 100-mile day 3 times on the course of that route. So pretty quick is sort of, it was during the sporting life era, the rise of baseball, the rise of horse racing, the rise of all of hunting and fishing and all the manly pursuits that followed the Civil War, and pedestrianism was just one of those feats at the time. But no, he was a champ from the get go.
That's great. Now, am I remembering correctly? Did he walk backwards at some point?
He did. He liked to walk backwards because he used different muscles in his legs, and if you're doing 38 miles a day, you need to give yourself a little bit of a break without stopping. I think it was when he went downhill, he liked to go walk backwards from time to time. He had a number of idiosyncrasies, but that was one of them.
That's great. Wow. Now, you said putting up your bicycle. Do you still do some cycling?
I'm not a hardcore road biker that goes out for 30, 40, 50-mile trips in the countryside, because Louisiana, it's flat, which is good, but the roads are not really well set up for bicycling. And B, my knees I did a lot of long distance bike touring when I was younger, and I sort of stripped my knees, and I'm good for about 20 miles, and then I start getting some pain. So I use a bike just for transportation. I easily will do 8 or 10 miles a day just getting around New Orleans. New Orleans is a great city for bicycling if you're careful, if you keep an eye out. Uh, cars don't see you, but if you just assume that you're invisible to all cars, you can do fine. And it's a there's a lot of parallel roadways here. So if one road is not great, you can always just move over a block and go there. Um, and it's yeah, it's beats traffic. You can't get around any other way during Mardi Gras and Jazz Fest. I don't think it's just a great way to get around. So yeah, I'm on the bike all the time.
That's great. I liked biking, but as a kid, when I had a paper out, I liked walking my paper out even more because I felt like it was time that I could be by myself and have an excuse for it
Uh huh.
because I'm working, so who's going to give me a hard time? And if I had a bike, it would shorten that amount of time. So I was glad to be able to do it just on foot.
No, I could see that. I could see that.
I even taking that walking thing about. I never liked running. Running felt uh, awful. That's the word I'm looking for. Awful.
Awful's a
And
good word.
yeah, but walking felt like, well, even if I'm tired, I can probably take one more step.
Yeah.
And so it always felt doable. And I think that's why I did a cancer walk, one of the American Cancer Society walks, and it was supposed to be a team effort, and you were supposed to have somebody on the track for the whole 24 hours. But the team that we were with was a lot of slightly younger folks than myself who were not. They're like, well, you don't have to. That's not a big deal. And I felt like, well, that's kind of what we said we would do. And so I ended up. That was the first really long walk I did because I walked for about 12 hours of that.
Hmm. Wow.
And it felt, and I, again, even when it was tiring, I thought, well, no one said how far I have to walk. They just say you have to keep walking. And like I said, you can always do one more step.
Yep. Yep. You usually can. Although sometimes I tried, I guess 3 times to duplicate one day of what Weston did, which is 38 miles in a day, and I was
Uh,
just unable. I was unable to do it. I could do about 22, 24 miles, and then I was just done. And for me, one of the things that Weston had, because he was studied by a lot of doctors because he could walk like no other, was that he had a wide pelvis. In other words, he had no chafing problems. Uh, up where the legs connect, and I am not someone with a wide pelvis, so I just end up with chafing, and I'm like, yeah, this is it, I'm done. So
yeah, no, I understand that. I've often thought I picked up. You've written for a lot of magazines. Have you ever done an article for Men's Journal?
I've done, yes, I used to do some cocktail and liquor coverage for them.
There you go. So when I first started getting Men's Journal, I thought, oh, this is good. I'll get this. But I'm not a super athlete. And so when I would open the magazine and there would be article after article of people doing superhuman feats, I thought, this might not be. I always thought there should be articles there for the everyday guy, like, uh, what to do about chafing, for example.
Right, yeah.
That
Yeah,
feels like a life hack I need.
I would read that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because sometimes I'll be walking and I'll think somebody's following me because I think there's somebody behind me in corduroys, but no, it's just my thighs.
Yeah, it happens. So,
Yeah. What? Give me a recommendation for a relatively affordable but really great rum that I think the listeners might also be able to look for and enjoy.
uh, there are lots. It's relatively affordable. I'll say under $50 a bottle. Um, if anyone's in the Northeast, Massachusetts, Maine, New York, might be a couple other states, Connecticut, that privateer rum I mentioned earlier is, I
Gotcha.
think it's really delicious, especially some of their limited releases. They have a series called Distiller's Drawer, and so they do things in special cask finishes, and they have different techniques they use. They have a Queen Share bottled and bond, which I think is one of the best rums available these days. If you're up north of Boston, it's worth a detour to the distillery where you can buy them right there. That's sort of it's more of a unicorn rum, one to keep an eye out for. But as far as basics, Santa Teresa out of Venezuela, their 1796 rum is quite delicious. Uh, there's a whole series out of Jamaica, Maison et Bellier, which is an importing company that's been going around getting single barrel rums out of different places, but the Jamaican rum in particular from the Hampden Estates is really, really good. Again, that's a little bit harder to find. For something that's real accessible, the Mount Gay is fine. I like Mount Gay. I will sit that. You can find that everywhere. So that would be another one to keep an eye out
For sure. And then you talk about in the book, you talk about Zacapa. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep, Zacapa also real good. I see that as a sort of a transitional rum, one that is really good to if you're not a rum drinker or if more commonly you were a rum drinker but gave it up because of a bad experience in college. That might be a good one to come back into the fold with. It tends to be sweeter and rounder than most other rums, and so so it's a good one to start with. But I think you might want to move away into something a little drier shortly after.
Gotcha. All those, sweet and round. That's if I was doing Tinder these days, that'd be the things I'd be looking for.
Yeah,
Saying,
yeah.
or and I would hope they were looking for is all I'm saying. Describes my body type exactly.
Well,
Uh,
bring a bottle as a cup.
yeah, there you go. Well, listen, Wayne, is there now? I don't want them to go to the wrong Wayne Curtis. Is there a space that our readers should look for, our listeners should look for, if they want to find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, WayneCurtis.com. That's me, not the other Wayne Curtis.
Uh-huh.
That hasn't been updated in a while because websites. But that's a good spot to go. I think I've got some links on the archive page there to stuff that I've been writing for a bunch of different publications. Now I write for Daily Beast online, usually a couple times a month. If you're in the Southeast, I write for Garden and Gun magazine, which is do their spirits and cocktail coverage. And there's a national drinking magazine called Imbibe, and I have a column in there and just occasional stories, other stories for them there. So they're out and around. Just if you come across Wayne Curtis, who's writing about fishing and lives in New Brunswick, Canada, that's not me. But
Although probably still, there you go. It's a good guy.
He's a good guy and he's a good writer. So go ahead and read some of that too. Just don't be confused.
That's good. It could have been worse too, because you could have had some Wayne Curtis that was a writer that was absolutely awful.
True. I've been lucky with that. So
yeah, and ditto. The Nick Hoff guy that we get confused with seems to be a solid comic. So at least people don't send me notes saying how awful I was the night before.
That's encouraging. Yes.
Yeah. Well, especially since I'm not on Tinder.
Yeah.
Yeah. My wife said I can't do that. It sounds reasonable.
Yeah. That seems reasonable. Yeah.
Wayne Curtis, thank you so much for talking to us, and we'll look for you in the future.
Okay. It was a pleasure. Good luck with everything. Take
Thanks,
care.
Wayne. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
And that was our chat with Wayne Curtis. Wasn't that great? I didn't tip you off early, but I managed to screw up. See, when I Googled Wayne Curtis, and I don't think I'm the only one that ever did this. There's more than one Wayne Curtis that's an author and a freelance writer. So I mixed it up, and I went ahead and left that in the show because I want you to know how absolutely human I am. And I'm so glad you joined us. Keep coming back. I'm going to keep trying to bring you some great guests and do my best to improve with every episode so that you can say Under the Crossbones, and then somebody says, well, doesn't it have a new host? And you go, yeah, but that guy's doing all right. He's at least half the man Phil was. No, Phil's still alive. That sort of sounded like he was gone. Anyway, so let's wrap this up. Remember, folks, the real treasure in life is not silver or gold. It's family and friends and fun. And I urge you to go out and get yourself some. I say do your best to make your life the adventure you want to have. I hope that you enjoyed today's show. My name is Nick Hoffman. This is Under the Crossbones. We'll see you next time.